This is a show for grown-ups.
And they say bad words.
And they say bad words.
Say final warning.
Final warning.
Hello and welcome to the Pod of Blunders. My name is Nate Magnuski, and with me today is CJ Heighton.
Hello, I'm CJ.
No, don't you dare interrupt me, CJ. I said podcast over.
Ouch. All right, there you go. There goes that.
How the hell are you, CJ?
Doing good. I'm doing good. Beautiful day in middle of April. All is well. Middle of getting ready for a bunch of other stuff in my life and exciting stuff up ahead. So I'm doing good.
Well, thanks for taking some time to talk to us tonight. I appreciate that.
Yeah, totally.
So I want to jump right into it and ask you the basest of questions. All right. What first got you into the hobby?
Oh God. So how much time you got? So who first got me into the hobby? Well, originally I actually didn't start off with D&D. I started off with a game called Amped Guard. If you know what live action role playing is, Boffer sports, it's essentially sword combat. I think I have a sword over there in the background. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can definitely see my armor though.
Oh yeah.
Either way, it's physical fighting sports. I got into that originally during my aftermath of high school because I had been into parkour and other stuff like that, and I was looking for some new way to exercise. And through that, I ended up meeting a couple of people who were talking about this D&D thing. And I had heard about it in high school, but never actually got involved. I played stuff like Magic the Gathering, but that was about as far as I was willing to go into the sort of geeky side of things. And I got really curious because these guys were all very interesting people. And I was trying to get closer to these people. So I was like, can I join into your campaigns? And there's some hiccups along the way, but I ended up actually getting into Pathfinder originally.
Oh.
Through Pathfinder, I ended up getting really into the Pistolero class and all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up sort of going from there and ending up in D&D through mutual acquaintances, support service networks and stuff like that. I had some friends who ran convention centers and campaigns and stuff. So I got into that through them. There was a 2-year campaign along the way called Shattered Seas. I'm actually planning on releasing that someday, but not yet.
Looking forward to that. So what's your preferred weapon in your combat sports?
Short sword, single short, but I also really like using crossbows. I have 3 of them behind that wall over there.
Oh, that's cool. I'm assuming you can't use those in combat sports.
See, the cool thing about them is they're real arrows, but you remove the arrowhead and you add essentially a foam half of you know those foam bouncy balls that you have to dogs and stuff, right? Stress toys. You use those at the end. They're modified heads that you apply to the thing and then just start shooting with them. They have pretty strict rate requirements though, so it kind of, you can't use a full-sized crossbow. It's kind of built to standard,
That's fascinating. I had no idea that you could do this stuff. Huh.
They're pretty cool. It's a great sport.
After this is over, I'm going to pick your brain about that.
Sure, absolutely. I'm more than happy to talk about it. Just ask me anything.
That's awesome. So, okay, now I have a bunch of questions about this. Do you make your own weapons? Do you have to purchase them? How does it work?
Well, okay. So there are some companies that make pre-made weapons for sale. Those are typically 40 to 80 Canadian dollars. So 50 to 60 USD. But that's also high-end, super light fabric and stuff like that. At its core, usually it's a golf club for the base, and then you have foam wrapped over top of that, taped down or glued down or whatever the heck, and then you have a fabric cover over top of that. And so when you hit somebody with it, zero response, right? It's lightly tapping somebody, right?
Wow.
So yeah, they're pretty cool.
That's amazing. Are there grand melees you get to enter with this stuff, or how does it work?
So that kind of depends on what kind of LARP you're looking to get into. If you're looking to get into something like Amped Guard, where it's a full fighting sport. A lot of what it is like 15 on 15 full combat, like capture the flag and like ball games and all that kind of stuff. There's one that's called ditching, where it's essentially a foam bat based version of football, essentially, where you're trying to hit the ball from one end of the field to the other using like spears and axes and shit.
Oh man,
super cool, super fun. And then there's also the one-on-one end of things where you're just essentially beating the crap out of somebody for 6.5 hours, which is also pretty fun. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I have to ask you more role-playing game questions now, but I do want to.
Sure. Totally.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it really
I don't
is.
think
It really is.
I've never met someone who came into D&D or the role-playing community through that avenue yet. Like, it's enough of a unicorn to find someone who's gotten into it without playing D&D first, let alone coming through the LARPing of things. Wow.
Yeah. It's a little interesting, isn't it? It's not quite the typical avenue, right?
So now when you play D&D, do you focus more on like tactical role play? Is that more important to you because of your background?
That's actually a very good question. I haven't really thought about it like that. I, in general, really like stuff like role-playing games and strategy games, right? I'm really into turn-based combat and like roguelikes. So the way that I approach D&D is sort of an offshoot of that, where a lot of my combat isn't really like, I like to get in close with the enemy. I like to maneuver around the enemy and play with the environment, knock over trees in order to obstruct paths, set traps, that kind of thing, right? I'm very much the lone wolf type character who likes to catch an opponent off guard in order to give the others an opportunity to attack on their own, right? I'm almost never on the front lines, and when I am, usually I don't do very well.
So getting back to your game design, what made you change from a consumer to a game designer?
Well, the thing that I always found kind of weird about tabletop RPGs is, at least with D&D, you have light crossbows and heavy crossbows, you have slings. That's about it. There are no options for playing more modern campaigns, and the things that I really like playing are stuff like Call of Cthulhu and stuff like Pathfinder, where you're using firearms, you're using like strategic combat, you're using stuff like grenades, you're working behind cover, it becomes less a all-out melee and more a how do I prevent myself from dying while giving my teams options to progress the fight naturally. And because I don't really use third party that much, because there's always the possibility that a player might just randomly drag a third party item in there that I don't know much about, right? So as a direct result, I was like, I want to make something official, or like as official as I can make it, that utilizes all the stuff I like from a bunch of different systems, put them all together into one thing that sort of combines them well, and then go from there. D&D is all well and good, but I wanted something that I could like take all the best aspects from it and sort of make my own, you know?
Yeah. So speaking of, the reason we got you on here tonight was to talk about your game Osmond Ward.
Yep.
Tell me about the setting of Osmond Ward.
Okay. Oh man, I need to think about that for a second. So Osmond Ward is a it's around 1886 to 1920s in terms of era. The story behind Osmond Ward is the world is around 400 to 500 years post Fourth War. The Fourth War was a devastating, almost magic nuke incident where essentially Fan Province was once this really lush, vibrant country, and after the bombs dropped, there was a massive magical fallout that essentially torched the land. Everything except for like the edges of the continent are barren desert. There's entire cities built around this area, but like essentially one of the big key things around Luna Ward, for example, is massive walls of glass that stick out at really odd angles because of the impact site, right? It's the sort of waves that you get out of that. You play as wanderers, mercenaries, merchants, magi, anybody really from this world, exploring the wastelands and sort of making your way through the world. I treat it like a slice of life game almost, mixed with like a combat thing where you choose your own adventures, but I apply a whole bunch of plot threads through each ward for the players to go and engage in. The main story involves the Lost, which are essentially these zombie things that rose from the ashes of the armies that died in the Fourth War. They're these intelligent undead, essentially, that can they can use magic despite not having eyes, which is really bad because magic's in the ocular nerve. So they're these unnerving, extremely confusing creatures that retain all of their intelligence and take people in the middle of the night. And the game's entirely, like my campaign that I'm running with my testers is entirely dedicated to that. What are the Lost? How do they work? And how do we stop them, essentially?
So how long have you been working on this game?
Well, since COVID started, actually.
Oh.
I just came up with something in the back of my head in the middle of the night. It was 3 a.m. I woke up, I was like, I'm just going to make something. And I wrote a bunch of things down and passed out again. I woke up in the morning and I started writing, and I had a 15-page document by the end of the night. So it sort of just happened, I guess. But it's always been in the back of my head, even during the Alvin campaign, which is the D&D game I ran. I had always been thinking about something like this. It just took COVID for me to make that push to make it happen, you know?
Always a silver lining, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Same reason we started this podcast. We were like, oh, it's COVID times. We got to do something.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's a good way. It's a good use of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we were speaking earlier about this game, and we described it, or you described it to me as a steampunk / Teslapunk RPG.
Yeah. Yep.
What the hell is Teslapunk, and how is it different than steampunk? Is it just like electricity?
Okay, so the way that I sort of understand it, because this might not necessarily be the traditional way to look at it,
sure,
is Teslapunk is utilizing the works of Nikola Tesla. It is mostly lightning powered things. It is working with Tesla coils to accomplish your goals. It is very intricate electrical powered inventions right around the 1920s. So you're getting like the start of mechs and shit like that are just operating off of like essentially glass Tesla coils filled with lightning and shit like that, right?
Yep.
Steampunk is more along the lines of you are using steam engines, you are using coal and oil and burners in order to get your stuff moving. It's a lot more the heavy stuff like trains and airships and stuff like that, versus where Teslapunk is more of like motor cars and rail travel and stuff like that.
So what was it about the genre that inspired you to make this game? Like what is the driving force of your love behind this?
I've always been super interested in steampunk stories. I've always looked at it as the idea of stories like Airman. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
No.
I've always been inspired by stories of like great adventures over like airship and rail travel and like the heroes that sort of accomplish them and how they're all flawed characters without like the heroic aspects in a lot of cases that make a story a story. I've always wanted to play a game like that, and I've never been able to find one that like fits with what I want, you know? So I figured that I would write my own story just based off of that, because I couldn't find anything that really worked for what we wanted, right? I wanted to make something that players can find, pick up, and instantly use. And that isn't really very common with stories like this. And as a side note, like steampunk isn't a very common genre in general. Like you see couple dozen stories a year come up in it, and much less like tabletop stuff, you know. Figured I'd like to add to a genre that's a little underused.
Yeah. Well done. So I know one of your goals you said was to have this like be a slice of life game where you can have you know, businessmen playing with warriors, playing with tinkers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
How hard was it to balance that and make each of those things be able to shine in the game?
It helps that I have a testing team, because it's very difficult to balance it all out. It requires a lot of people who have very different mindsets. For example, with me, I'm very much more into the crafting thing, but it requires you to make it so that crafters are just as viable as combat is just as viable as like political stuff, right? So you want to make a kind of game where a person with political sway can like get enemies to stand down just as much as a person who can give them a brand new rifle and say stand down, you know? Like it becomes a game where you gotta balance 3 different aspects of your storyline perfectly equally, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. What advice do you have for DMs, or what do you call them? Game masters, Steam masters,
World weavers. Yeah,
world weavers. There we go. That's beautiful.
Yeah, there you go.
What advice do you have for world weavers to try to herd all these cats and get a cohesive story going out of this?
What you need to do a lot of the time is talk to the players, determine what they want out of the game and out of the story, and determine what all of you think would be an interesting campaign, and then go from there. A lot of this is built off of collaboration and cooperation, so don't just make it happen without referring to anybody or asking anybody what you want out of your game, you know? One final thing, research. Research the hell out of the thing that you're doing, because if you have a historical context, you can make it happen a lot easier, I guess.
Sure. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, when I was reading through, I was like, you would need a session 0 and a very strong session 0 to be able to.
Absolutely.
So this is a classless system that you have here, right? You can really design whatever. Can you walk me through character creation? Say I want to make an itinerant priest wandering around.
Okay, so if you're making a priest, first of all, you roll your statistics. So when you roll statistics, you have a static stat set. So strength, dex, con, int, wisdom, and charisma in that order. However, you can swap any 2 abilities as a direct result of that. I wanted to make something that is strict without while still having a little bit of leeway, because it's essentially, I wanted it to be closer to like D&D 1.0 than D&D 5e, essentially.
Yeah.
From there, you want to roll your hit points, grit, and mana. All of these are the same, no matter who you are, no matter what your statistics are. The only thing that changes is when you're rolling hit points, you roll a d10 plus con, and everything after that is d6. If you're playing human tenacious, you add extra hit points to that, but there's no other real way to adjust that. From there, you want to go into your advantages and disadvantages. One of the big things in Osmond is also the advantage system. So you select 3 things to take a single advantage dice in. So you roll 2 dice, take the highest. And then you take 3 disadvantages. These are what you're good and terrible at, essentially. And as you level up, you get more of those or less of those. And then from there, you go into abilities. Abilities are how you build your character. They're like your class features, essentially. Like, you know how with a paladin you get like, I have divine intervention, turn undead, right? These abilities you can essentially take, for example, the equivalent of that. You can take something like Gladiator, where you get bonus movement when you're within 10 feet of an opponent or a large grouping. Using your charisma, you can add extra damage dice and stuff like that. Those are your class skills. Then you choose race and caste, and you're done.
Seems straightforward.
We're still working on it a little bit. We're trying to streamline it just a little bit.
It seems the process is straightforward, but there's probably a lot of choices you have to make along the way to really.
It takes time. If somebody is relatively new to it, then they really need to take you need to give them like an hour or 2 total.
Yeah. All right. Sticking with the mechanics of the system, how does conflict resolution work? And what do we have to do?
Well, a lot of the time it works a little bit like 5e, where you're using your initiative, you're using your turn orders, all that kind of stuff, but it has room to maneuver. It all kind of depends on the DM. If you're in a conflict, a large amount of the time you have stuff like manipulate checks, which allows you to convince an opponent like, hey, you don't want to be doing this. The guy who you're working for is probably not paying you enough to get killed, you want to turn away and go, right? You can do stuff like bribing them, paying them tact to resolve the situation. You can shoot them to death. It's similar to 5e, how it's kind of hazy how exactly you can resolve things. But yeah, it's just it depends on player's choice and DM's choice a lot of the time.
And is this like a D20 system? Is it?
It is a D20 system, yes.
Okay. All right. What was it about the D20 that made you go, that's the dice for me?
Well, first of all, it's the randomness. With something like D6 success failure, I was thinking about doing something like that where it's similar to like what the hell is it called? White Wolf, World of Darkness.
Yep.
I was thinking about that, but it almost allows too much control over the dice. With something like a D20 system, there's still some randomness in it where you can roll a 1, you can roll a 20, you can roll anything in between, right? And it's intuitive enough that I don't really see the need to go into anything that's like too offhand, especially considering the complexity of everything else.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. And then you also have grit, which allows you to like re-roll dice and re-roll your opponent's attacks and all that kind of stuff, which adds even more control over the dice, right? So might as well have some randomness to it.
So I'm always interested with games and where they split the power dynamics of the narrative. A lot of games, dump things on the GM, and the GM's has a lot of narrative control. Some games are completely communal. Where does your game fall on that spectrum?
The GM determines a lot of how the story beats go, but the players in a lot of situations have control over the dice. Again, grit is a system that allows you to as you when you create a character, you roll a d4. That is your grit points. Every level you roll an additional d4. Grit allows you to do stuff like re-roll your own dice, take 10, take 15, establish existence of items usable by the DM, like that kind of stuff, right? So a lot of the time what it is the DM poses you a situation and you roll. You get a 1. You're like, okay, I don't like that result. I'm going to burn 2 grit points from my total and I'm going to re-roll that dice, right? So players have limited control over the narrative that way, allowing them to sort of affect opponents' dice rolls and shit like that in order to really like make their story go the way that they want, I suppose.
What fascinates me about Osmond Ward is that it's an incredibly open game, narratively speaking, but the rules seem fairly high crunch, fairly high complexity.
Yeah.
How do you feel this game falls on a spectrum between like, some small indie game on one end where it's completely diceless, like Amber Diceless or something, and on the other end, like what's the Champions, the crazy superheroes game?
Yeah. I think this falls closer to like Pathfinder, where there's a lot of dice crunch and there's a lot of like system complexity, but I think that it's leaning more towards the indie side than like the AAA insanity sort of side, right? It's 170 pages, so it's still pretty complex, but most of that's optional stuff you can just kind of skip. So it all kind of depends on how complex you really want to make the game.
So you're playtesting it now, right? But it's available now, right?
Yep.
So where can people find this game?
People can find this game on Drive-Thru RPG by looking up Osmond Ward or Connor Heighton, which is like the publisher page for me. You can find pre-done free adventures. You can find the Voyager's Guide, which is all of the lore. There's about 80 pages of that right now, and we're still adding and improving on this. I should mention now, this game is complete for this particular version, but we are constantly improving, adding, and removing features as the game progresses on our own, like tester side. We have 37 active players and 6 DMs running this, so we're constantly finding ways to adjust and make the game better, right? Addition to addition, though, it is complete. Like, you can play that without problem or changes or whatever the heck, and it's just the miscellanea that you download that adjusts that. Other than that, yeah, you can find it through Drive-Thru RPG. I'm planning on putting it into itch.io, and you can also find it on WRKS Games website, which is a smaller indie storefront.
That's
Other
awesome.
than that, yeah.
So, pie in the sky ideal. Where do you see this game going? Like, what is your ultimate goal for this game?
I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be rich. I just want to have enough going with this game where people are having fun creating their own stories and enjoying the game. That's all I want. If we can make something and have a community that works and is able to sort of cooperate with each other, that's all that matters to me.
I can't believe you've been working on this game for only a year. You have like a completely playable version. You have lore books. You have adventures. Like, how are you this prolific of a writer? Yeah, how do you find time?
Well, I am autistic, ADHD, Asperger's, a bunch of stuff, and as a direct result, it's kind of hard for me to find work. You can sort of imagine. As a direct result, I am on Persons with Disabilities, which allows me to essentially the government pays me a certain fee, like a certain sum every month, just to live. I'm able to pay rent that way. I'm able to buy groceries, and then I'm also a street performer. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah, guitar.
That guitar down there, but I am a street performer by profession. So whenever I have too little cash to make it through the month, I can make money through playing on the street for people, essentially.
You fucking rule. And Canada fucking rules too. Like you guys.
It really does. It's awesome. It's a good country.
Yeah. Wow. I'm blown away by how much you've been able to do. I'm blown away by this game. I wish you every bit of success that you want and more than you could possibly stand.
God help me. Let's hope and pray.
If there's one last thing you can tell our listeners, one last thing you want to talk about, maybe we haven't gotten to yet, what's something that you want them to know?
I hope you guys enjoy the system. I hope you guys have fun with the world that I've created. This is a labor of love for me and everybody working on the project. And if you personally feel like you can contribute to the project, we mostly look for creators under 1,000 Twitter followers or of like small form. If you think that you can do something for the project and you can have some fun with it, I am more than willing to pay to get something into the guide for you, just as long as I've got the money to do it, right? All of the profits from the guide go back into creators and go back into the guide. I don't take a single cut of it at all. So as long as you guys are having fun, that's what matters to me.
Thank you for answering all my intrusive questions about combat sports, because I have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
This game is so cool. I really can't wait to get to the table myself, because it speaks to me.
Totally.
Hey, I'm gonna let you go for the night, but thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
All right, awesome. I'll see you later.
All right, take care, man.
Take care.
And that's all for this week's episode. Sorry if I'm a little echoey for this end part. So I just moved, and my house has no furniture, so I'm right now recording this from a mattress on a bare wood floor. Luxury. Thanks again to Connor for coming on the show and talking about his cool game. Make sure you follow the links in the show notes to his Discord and to, well, his game. You know, that's kind of the whole purpose of this. If you want a system that can really handle any sort of game you want to play, that has enough crunch to keep things interesting without leaving narrative in the dust, check out Osmond Ward. It's awesome. As always, I want to end the show by thanking our patrons. You guys make it possible for us to keep doing this show, and I cannot tell you how much I've appreciated it. Especially this past half year has been really tough for me personally, but knowing that you guys have been there for me and for Richard and for the show, and just knowing that I have a reason to keep making this it's really affirming. So thank you very much. And for those out there who are listening and aren't patrons, thank you too. If it weren't for you, then there'd be no reason to keep doing this. And I just got to say, I really appreciate y'all. Thank you. Normally, I'd leave the show with a call to action, rate and review, all that fun stuff, but I'm not going to do that today. Just thank you. Know how much you mean to me. And for the pot of blunders, I've been Nate Magnuski, and may all your Ds be 12s.